Hello, everybody. I'm Hank Wilson, and welcome to the Hidden History of Texas, episode 94. Are you ready for that? We're talking about the Rio Grande frontier. This is actually part 3. Today I'm going to talk about a couple of what we call the frontier forts guarding West Texas. Like I said, welcome back. Now, last time we crossed the Pecos River and entered one of the most remarkable landscapes in our state, the Trans-Pecos. Talked about a Texas of mountains instead of rolling hills, deserts instead of forests, vast distances instead of crowded settlements. It's a beautiful country. But it could also be a very, very dangerous one. Now today, I'd like to answer a simple question. How did people safely travel through this immense wilderness? Well, the answer lies in a network of frontier forts that stretched across West Texas. Their purpose wasn't to conquer the land, it was to connect it. When we hear the word fort, well, many of us picture thick stone walls, cannons, and soldiers preparing for battle. The reality on the Texas frontier was often much different. Most frontier forts weren't castles, they were working communities. Soldiers lived there, families lived there, blacksmiths, teamsters, doctors, cooks, laundresses, merchants, scouts, and civilians all played a role in keeping these isolated outposts alive. Now, in many ways, a frontier fort was less like a military base and more like a very small town whose primary mission happened to be protecting the frontier. By the 1850s, more settlers, ranchers, and merchants were moving westward. Stagecoaches carried passengers and mail. Freight wagons hauled supplies. Ranchers expanded into new country. Yet the further west people traveled, the further they moved from established communities. Water became scarce. Distances became immense. Travelers could spend days crossing country where there were few signs of civilization. For many, reaching the next fort meant reaching safety. Among the most important of these posts was Fort Davis. Nestled in the cool elevations of the Davis Mountains, the fort occupied one of the most strategic locations in West Texas. It guarded the San Antonio-El Paso Road, one of the principal overland routes across the Southwest. Now, if you've ever driven Interstate 10 across West Texas, and I've driven it more times than I can count, you're following a path not terribly different from the one travelers depended upon more than 150 years ago. The landscape may look timeless, but for generations, the road represented connection, mail, commerce, communication, hope. Fort Davis also tells us another important story. Following the Civil War, many of the soldiers belonged to the African American regiments that history remembers as the Buffalo Soldiers. These men escorted wagon trains, protected mail coaches, constructed roads, and patrolled enormous stretches of difficult country. Their assignments often took them across hundreds of miles of mountains and desert. The work was demanding, the conditions hard. Yet their contributions became an essential part of opening West Texas to settlement and commerce. Today Fort Davis remains one of the best preserved frontier military posts in the nation, allowing visitors to walk through the very buildings where these soldiers lived and served. Now, further east stood another important outpost, that is Fort Stockton. Now, if Fort Davis owed its existence to the mountain passes and transportation routes, Fort Stockton owed its existence to something even more valuable, water. Specifically, Comanche Springs. See, long before there was a military fort, long before Texas became a state, Native peoples knew these springs well. Spanish explorers depended upon them. Travelers crossing the desert planned their journeys around them. You see, in the Trans-Pecos, water wasn't simply convenient. It was survival. The Army recognized the importance of Comanche Springs almost immediately. A fort built near reliable water could protect travelers while providing soldiers with the resources they needed to remain in one of the harshest environments in North America. Like Fort Davis, Fort Stockton became an important stopping point for stagecoaches, freight wagons, mail carriers, and settlers moving across West Texas. It represented more than military protection. It represented certainty. After days of dust, heat, and uncertainty, travelers knew there would be fresh water ahead. Now, one thing I've come to appreciate while studying these frontier forts is that they weren't isolated places. If you look at them, they formed a network. Each supported the others. Each protected a different section of the transportation routes that connected San Antonio with El Paso and points beyond. Without that network, settlement across much of West Texas would have been far slower and far more dangerous, if not maybe impossible. The forts helped make the frontier accessible, not easy, but possible. Now today, many visitors stop at Fort Davis or Fort Stockton because they enjoy history. I know that's one of the reasons I do. Now others simply happen to pass through on their way to Big Bend or El Paso. Yet these quiet places remind us of something important. The highways we drive today didn't simply appear. Long before there were interstates, long before there were paved roads, before automobiles, there were wagon trails, mail routes, stagecoaches, horse patrols, and frontier ports that made these journeys possible. Now, as I travel through West Texas, I'm always struck by the silence. Distances remain enormous. The mountains still dominate the horizon. The desert still commands your respect. It's not difficult to imagine a soldier standing watch here 150 years ago, looking out across the same landscape and understanding that help was many miles away. Perhaps that's why these forts continue to capture our imagination. They remind us that courage isn't always found in dramatic battles. Sometimes courage is found in showing up each day, doing your duty, and standing watch in a place where few others were willing to go. Now, next time, we're going to leave the forts behind and visit the communities that grew around them. We'll travel to Alpine, where the cool mountain air helped shape a ranching community that would become the gateway to the Big Bend. Until then, remember that history isn't only written in great cities or famous battlefields. Sometimes it's written beside a mountain pass or around a spring in the desert, where ordinary people quietly made extraordinary journeys possible. I'm Hank Wilson. This has been Hidden History of Texas. Until next time, keep asking questions, because history always has another story waiting just down the trail.